Yeah, so the hostile environment is kind of, in the broadest terms, basically the government's policy of making life as difficult and as possible for people who are seeking sanctuary here in the UK. And that involves things like trying to turn us kind of everyday people into border guards through like immigration reporting, and it involves creating basically like destitution amongst refugees and asylum seekers.
So this is a reporting centre here. What do people have to do in a reporting centre?
So when people are in the asylum system, they have to come and it's called like signing on, and that can vary from like sometimes every week to much more infrequently every month. So they have to come and basically prove they're still where the Home Office wants them to be. But the issue with that is some people can be detained without notice and sent to a detention centre.
Yeah, so you were giving a good speech about housing earlier. We have lots of asylum seekers in hotels and in substandard accommodation, and we have a lot of British people who are in a similar situation. So why are asylum seekers in such a situation in the first place?
Obviously homelessness is a really big issue in like amongst all populations really. The homelessness situation in the UK generally is awful, and the government really needs to do more about it. In particular, there's been a big rise last year in homelessness amongst refugees. So when people get their refugee status, so these are people who've been approved to stay, as it were, the governments recognise their claim for sanctuary, and you have 28 days then to leave your asylum accommodation, which just not long enough for people to find a home basically. So in Sheffield and elsewhere in the country, there's been a huge rise in people who get their refugee status and then become homeless. So it was rough sleeping amongst newly granted refugees rose 1,000% at the end of last year. That's the national picture, not just Sheffield. So it's a really difficult situation for people, because it should be a really great moment when you get your status. You know, people have often been waiting years and years and years, but they're just put back into another really difficult situation.
Yeah, well, we've got a lot of support for the refugees here today behind us. Some protests are actually very much opposed to refugees and immigrants in general, and some of those activists tend to use refugees as a bit of a scapegoat and often talk about the homelessness among British people, and say that refugees are basically wasting our money. Do you think the government can really accommodate both British people and refugees?
Yeah, definitely, and we're really clear that our campaign against homelessness is for everyone. We want to end homelessness amongst all populations. It's not just, it's an issue for everyone. But what the government does is use their lack of investment in services and their bad policies, and they use refugees as a scapegoat, like you said. It's not the fault of people coming over here that no one's building any social housing anymore, that our social housing stock's depleted, that rent is going up exponentially. They're just used as a scapegoat for government decision making.